Hi, Terry Lynch here, medical doctor, accredited psychotherapist, best-selling mental health author, creator of mental health courses for mental health professionals and the general public. To coincide with my article on working with people with a psychiatric diagnosis, to be published in the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, BACP, their Healthcare Counselling and Psychotherapy Journal in July 2025, I'm in the process of creating a course with a similar title for psychotherapists, counsellors, psychologists, and other mental health professionals that might find this of relevance to them. Like the article, the course will be entitled Working with People with a Psychiatric Diagnosis. The psychiatric diagnoses that I will be considering within this course, Working with People with a Psychiatric Diagnosis, includes anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, eating disorders, personality disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorder, body dysmorphic disorder, and so on. What would be considered to be the standard psychiatric diagnoses? Within this course, which I expect to have available by May-June 2025, there are 4 sections: an outline of the current prevailing understanding of the psychiatric diagnoses, a critique of this prevailing understanding, the setting out of a trauma and psychologically informed understanding of the psychiatric diagnoses, and working with people with a psychiatric diagnosis. It wouldn't be sufficient for me to create a course on working with people with psychiatric diagnoses, the 4th section here, without the previous 3 sections. To do so would be incomplete. What we're considering in this video applies to 2 of these 4 sections: the current prevailing understanding of the psychiatric diagnoses and a critique of this prevailing understanding. In the course itself, I will be going into more detail than I'm going into in this video. We will now briefly consider 3 of the most commonly made assertions about these psychiatric diagnoses. Here are 3 of the assertions that are most commonly made about psychiatric diagnoses. They are regularly asserted to be brain disorders, brain chemical imbalances, genetically inherited disorders. Here's an important point. If any of these, are true, are scientifically verified, are medically established to be correct, to be true, as is widely promoted and believed, then psychotherapy would have little or no role in relation to the psychiatric diagnoses. As, for example, psychotherapy has quite a limited role in Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and other verified brain diseases, brain disorders. The truth is, not one of these has been scientifically verified, medically established to be true, to be correct. Let's look at the first one: psychiatric diagnoses as brain disorders. If the psychiatric diagnoses were verified brain disorders, they would of course be included in comprehensive lists of brain disorders from respected authoritative sources, such as the American National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, a branch of the National Institute of Health, NIH, part of the American government's Health and Human Services, the Australian Brain Foundation, and WebMD, one of the most accessed and respected sources of medical information. The website of each of these sources contains an extensive list of brain disorders. Not one of these authoritative sources contains a single reference to any psychiatric diagnosis. The list of brain disorders on each of these sites includes conditions that are much rarer than most psychiatric diagnoses. These conditions deserve to be on these brain disorder lists, regardless of how rare they are, because they meet the medical criteria for a brain disorder, criteria which none of the psychiatric diagnoses meet, which is why they're not included in any respected authoritative list of brain disorders. So that's psychiatric diagnoses as brain disorders. Next, we will consider the psychiatric diagnoses as brain chemical imbalances, as they are so commonly asserted to be. If the psychiatric diagnoses were verified brain chemical imbalances, their presence would be uniformly presented and comprehensively explained across the board from authoritative psychiatry sources, as happens, for example, in diabetes. Diabetes is a scientifically verified, a medically established chemical imbalance illness. This fact is confirmed on every authoritative medical site about diabetes. The chemical imbalance being increased levels of blood glucose secondary to a deficiency of insulin, which itself is secondary to a disease process within the pancreas. The claimed presence of brain chemical imbalances is not uniformly presented and comprehensively explained in psychiatric sources. For example, from the Royal College of Psychiatrists in 2017, in response to a question from a counsellor, question being, what is the evidence that depression is due to a chemical imbalance in the brain? The Royal College of Psychiatrists replied, "Hi there. The old idea that antidepressants correct a chemical imbalance in the brain is an oversimplification, and we do not support this view." The Royal College of Psychiatrists clearly stating that they do not support the notion of chemical imbalance in the brain. Again, from the Royal College of Psychiatrists the following year, 2018, another tweet, "Antidepressants don't correct a chemical imbalance in the brain. This criticism of antidepressants comes from the old belief that depression is due to low levels of 5-HT, serotonin, and or low adrenaline in the brain." The Royal College of Psychiatrists clearly stating that they do not subscribe to the notion of brain chemical imbalance. The psychiatric diagnoses as brain chemical imbalances? No. The psychiatric diagnoses are not verified to be brain chemical imbalances. There is no scientifically verified evidence that confirms the presence of brain chemical imbalances in relation to any psychiatric diagnosis. Finally, the third common assertion, that psychiatric diagnoses are genetically inherited disorders. If the psychiatric diagnoses were verified genetic disorders, they would of course be included in comprehensive lists of genetic disorders from respected authoritative sources, such as, for example, GARD, the Genetic and Rare Diseases Information Centre, a branch of the National Centre for Advancing Translational Services, a branch of the National Institutes of Health, NIH, which itself is a branch of the US Department of Health and Human Services. You can't get more official than that. Secondly, the National Human Genome Research Institute, genome meaning anything to do with genes, again a branch of the National Institutes of Health in America. And Wikipedia. Wikipedia contains a very comprehensive list of known verified genetic disorders. Each of these sources contain comprehensive lists of genetic disorders. No psychiatric diagnosis is mentioned in any of these lists. Conditions that are much, much rarer than, say, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, are regularly mentioned in these lists, and so they should be, because unlike the psychiatric diagnoses, they are scientifically verified, medically established genetic disorders. The simple truth, therefore, then, is that the psychiatric diagnoses have not been verified to be genetically inherited disorders. What are the implications of these truths? The much asserted biological basis of the psychiatric diagnoses is totally unverified scientifically, totally unestablished medically. Therefore, in the public interest, in the pursuit of truth, of better care, of better outcomes, the grossly underestimated role of a trauma and psychotherapeutically informed understanding of the psychiatric diagnoses needs to be urgently addressed. The excellent Professor Joanna Moncrief, one of a small minority of psychiatrists that I respect, attached to the University College London, posted on X in March 2025, instead of seeing these experiences, mental disorders, the psychiatric diagnoses, as signs of broken biology, what if we understood them as meaningful responses to life's crises? Absolutely. The prevailing understanding of and approach to the psychiatric diagnoses needs to change. And it needs to change towards a trauma and psychologically informed understanding and approach. This is where psychologists, psychotherapists, counsellors come in. Because these mental health professionals, although they may not realise it, and I can say this because I'm a medical doctor as well as a psychotherapist, these mental health professionals have a far greater understanding of trauma and psychology than the medical professionals who end up having primary responsibility for the psychiatric diagnoses. If you are a mental health professional and you would like to know more about my upcoming course on working with clients with a psychiatric diagnosis, comment or message me below and I will make sure that you are informed when the course is complete and available. And if you like this video, please share it. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.